Next curve.
Hey everyone, welcome to Next Curve's Rethink webcast and our series From the Radio to the Rick. And I'm Leonard Lee, Executive Analyst at Next Curve, joined by my very good friend and renowned telco tech analyst and industry analyst, Earl Lum of EJL Wireless Research. Hey dude, how's it going?
I am doing fine over here in Dallas and looking forward to seeing you in a day and a half.
Yeah, for 5G Americas. Can't believe I just called you dude. But
it's
in this
better
episode,
than other things.
Yeah, there's a lot worse things that I could have called you, but
Exactly.
I won't. Yes. And in this episode, we'll be recapping MWC Las Vegas 2024, which I opted out of this year. And of course, it took place in Las Vegas on October 8th to, I think it's like the 11th, right? Something like that. Okay. All right. Around that time frame, that week. And before we get started, remember to like, share, and comment on this episode and subscribe to the Rethink podcast here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout. Take us on the road and on your jog. Listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And so with that, let's get started here, Earl. So how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing fine and, ready to give you a recap of what I saw and thought about Vegas.
This is going to be good. This is going to be good. Yeah.
It will be. And I would say you didn't miss much by opting out and doing your other event that week.
Yeah, I'm like triple booked. This week this whole season is insane. I don't know how I'm going to handle all of this, but you guys didn't hear that. Okay. I'll figure it out. But yeah,
I know who you are
this year. Yeah, I opted out this year, and heavily relied on you to bring back the story, the MWC Las Vegas 2024 story. And, I think the saga that the CTIA and GSMA are going through right now is trying to figure out how to reconstitute MWC, right? And,
MWC in the United States.
In the United States. Yeah. And it's been kind of a slog, right? Especially after the pandemic. I think the last time we saw a sizable MWC US event was in Los Angeles, right? I think it was 2019.
2019 was where it was still somewhat healthy and somewhat alive.
Yeah, and there was great hope at that time that the media industry and the telco industry would figure out some kind of 5G infused and powered synergy. And a lot of that hope was due to this massive acquisition that AT&T did of Time Warner, right? I think on the order of $60 billion. Or at least that's what they wrote off. Yeah.
Yes. Small cells were the big talk. Millimeter wave was obviously the exciting new trend that was happening as 5G was just getting launched here in the US by Verizon.
Right. Yeah. We've actually come a long way. It's been over 5 years since peak of 5G excitement and anticipation. And now, so what did you see at MWC Las Vegas?
What I saw was after 26 years of CTIA and MWC San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas was a show that needs to be either put out of his misery, completely rebooted. Because if I was an exhibitor, I don't think I would have been very happy paying what I paid to be there with a booth, with a meeting room, or whatever. And I think the show is reached a level where it's not really about mobile. It's about mobile, but it's not mobile carrier. It's mobile enterprise.
Mm.
It's in building, and it's not about the macro network like the other shows that MWC puts on around the world.
Type of
Right.
issue.
So I can't say some four-letter words that I would use, but I don't think it was a good show. And after, again, 26 years of going to this show, this was the low point. I had a great show personally because of the meetings that I have
Right.
and the people that I was meeting with. But if I was going to the show to try to get contacts, to try to justify the amount of money I paid in exhibiting at the show, I would not be looking to come back. Or I would only be going to Barcelona because it's not worth it from a time and money perspective. And I think the major thing this year, even though last year was already on the way down and on life support, we
Yeah.
are brain dead now. And should we pull the plug and take everyone off the respirator, is how I would describe this year. Because the number of exhibitors was still very low. The quality of the exhibitors was, again, nowhere near what you would expect from an MWC event. And I think that the majority of the meetings that actually happened were in the food court off the exhibitor floor, where
Yeah.
everyone staked out a table and just sat there all day and had their meetings for free.
Yeah. And maybe the lesson learned here is that they need to get out of the West Hall and go to a different hall where there isn't a massive cafeteria where people will congregate and have their business meetings there. Maybe make that a little bit inconvenient. I'm sure
Right.
there's a lot
And they
of other.
people in the cafeteria in charge for that because that's not their jurisdiction, since their jurisdiction is on the show floor and in the
Yeah.
meeting rooms. So if they could charge, I'm sure they would.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I've noticed over the last, I think it's like 3 years that they've been holding MWC um, uh, US, I guess, in Las Vegas. That cafeteria or that food court area has become increasingly populated and used in exactly the capacity that you're talking about. So,
Right. And it was full the whole time while the exhibit floor and hall was mostly empty and
oh
small.
yeah, yeah,
You
and
could walk down the aisles and you didn't have a problem in getting from any of the aisles down from one end to the other. Uh, the
yeah,
booths, if you were lucky, maybe you had one person there, but most of the
yeah,
exhibitors looked like they were bored and waiting for people to come up and talk to them.
uh,
And I'm not sure about the actual panels. I was on one panel on the first day
yeah.
that was full, but it might have been because it was the first day and it was the first panel of the event that it was full and standing room only compared to whatever other panels happened after that.
Yeah. So how was that panel? How was it? What was it?
Was on rural open RAN opportunities, and it was moderated by Dave Simpson out of Virginia Tech.
Mhm.
And it was really focused about, with two operators on the panel from the rural markets, how can you deploy Open RAN in the rural market? I think the key takeaway was most rural operators do not have a substantial tech force in their operations. They may have a half a dozen engineers. So if you're an
Right.
Open RAN company and you want to sell an Open RAN solution, the amount of hand holding you're going to need to do is substantial. And they're going to need a fully tested turnkey product because they have no time to test it and they
Sure.
have no resources to test it. So I
Right.
think that was something where it's not about the cost necessarily, which is also an important thing, but it's the fact that there are no resources at these rural operators. And if you throw them 5 pieces of Open RAN equipment and expect that they're going to do something in a lab, you are mistaken.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think they really need a much more integrated and turnkey product from the vendors in the Open RAN community. And the question is that even possible
Yeah.
at the current stage we are at within the industry?
Yeah, and it just it harkens back to our episodes now, almost going on 3 years ago of Open RAN Squid Game. I'm sure a lot of people hate it when I bring that up, but hey, now we are where we are. I mean,
Yes, we are having calamari, and the squid's been fried in a bunch of delicious ways,
yeah,
but uh, it's still the incumbents. It's still single vendor Open RAN, at least on the DU side, with maybe a second or third radio guy if you're lucky to pick up the scraps, which is
right.
a far cry from the initial hopes, expectations of the industry, and it's not cheaper.
Yeah, and that was always the assertion, right, by the Open RAN
Right.
movement for quite
The
some time.
competitiveness would drive down costs, and that is
Right.
not happening, and I don't think that will ever happen.
Mm. Okay. So there's some brutal honesty from Earl Lum. I mean, I wasn't on the ground to observe a lot of this stuff, so I'm really counting on your very frank and really beyond brutally honest assessment here. So, what were some of the big themes? You mentioned enterprise, but were there any other thing? I'm sure, was that still a thing this year, or?
So T-Mobile's booth, which was one of the biggest and still right at the beginning of the West Hall entrance to the exhibit floor, was populated with a bunch of enterprise case studies, including um, their first responder solution that they're coming out with from a private networks perspective.
Mm,
They were the only operator other than US Cellular, which had a meeting room in the way back of the exhibit hall, but
mm,
no booth. And then Verizon had their meeting rooms, but they didn't have a booth at all on the exhibit hall. So in looking at those applications and the fact that it was Verizon Business that was there at the show and T-Mobile Business at the show, AT&T didn't bother to show up. And again, there are no Canadian operators or no other Latin American operators at the show. Made it to the point where if your whole goal was to meet with an operator, I
mm.
don't think that was going to be too successful unless you somehow got the meetings with
Yeah.
Verizon and AT and T-Mobile, and you were figuring out that you had an enterprise solution to sell to them or to pitch to them at the show.
Right. And I think last year GSMA made a point that there were a growing number or percentage of enterprise buyers or influencers coming in and checking out the event to get a feel for. At that time, the whole excitement was around private networks. So
And Open RAN or on go with CBRS or whatever
right,
technology, right? It was really
yeah,
about what could you do with private networks. And I think that's still bubbling along, but is certainly not ever increasing. And the Open RAN aspect of that, I think, is taking a hit at this point in terms of what are the real opportunities. And again, we talked about Ericsson Neutral Host as
yeah.
being a complete disruptor for the private network market.
Hmm.
And so I think, again, there was a lot of DAS in building, small cell exhibitors there. Uh, the majority of a lot of the booths that I saw, whether it was from CommScope or GMA Wireless or whoever, was all really targeted for in-building wireless systems, which
Mm,
is, again, enterprise, but it's like a DAS show now, and it's supposed to be a mobile macro show.
yeah, it's supposed to be. Okay.
Supposed to be.
All right. So so in terms of like things that you were interested in, you were looking for, what were some of those things that were top of your list going
My
in?
list was going in. I had a bunch of meetings that I wanted to have with friends and people that I've known in the industry for decades
Mm,
to give me a up-to-date pulse on how bad is it and is it going to get better and is there any light at the end of the tunnel.
yeah.
And a lot of the vendors that I talked to were macro antenna suppliers
Mhm.
because that's a key part of the macro network build.
Yeah.
If no one's shipping antennas, then other things are likely not happening. And
Right.
so that was a very big focus. And those meetings went well. And I think one of the vendors that I talked to, it was the funniest and the saddest quote that I will have from Las Vegas, which was that particular person had lost all hope in wireless
Ah.
and was thinking about getting out of the industry.
Mm.
So if we go back to every downturn that we've had through all of these cycles, the light at the end of the tunnel was always the possibility that there would be new spectrum
Yeah.
that would be unleashed and available, auctioned off, and that would start the whole cycle again. As we look, if we want to include T-Mobile's latest, I want to give back all of the crappy millimeter wave spectrum, and I'll just take the good stuff and redraw gerrymander the partial economic area of the FCC's database. One extreme to there is no N104 6.7 gigahertz spectrum because of the Wi-Fi guys, to where there is no new driver coming out of this downturn. And then the question is if we hit bottom next year, then does it just stay flat for the foreseeable future? And I think that was a lot of the sentiment that I got from the people that I talked to at the show.
Wow, that's really sobering. I mean, those are so.
It also aligns with with the Capex drops that we're seeing from all the operators. Yeah. It's not a surprise. But the real question is I'm not sure where the upswing is going to be once we get through the bottom. And is this a very long, wide U-shaped recovery, or is there a recovery after 25? I think should be on everyone's mind as we go into the end of this year and into next year. What is going to be a key driver? And right now, it's always been spectrum. And if that isn't available, then what else is the next opportunity?
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So, any talk about AI? I have to ask that.
Very little talk about it. Maybe on the security side, there was a security panel that I listened to that I thought was pretty important because, again, if you look at Open RAN, there's just more things to hack.
Yeah.
But AI was more on spectrum sharing in terms of understanding if I have the new 3.1 to 3.3 band that's being looked at under the CBRS spectrum, how can I do spectrum sharing and use AI to understand the RF conditions that are really out there, and then be able to make sure that as I'm sharing amongst different users or end users of the network and all of these resources, and I'm have the most efficient use of that entire bandwidth. So AI was really more focused on spectrum efficiency that I was able to see at the show.
Yeah, and I guess also it's a big question of what kind of AI are you talking about it, right? Because there's so much talk about generative AI now. It's almost like back in during the crypto hype, the crypto community appropriated blockchain, and all of a sudden blockchain became crypto. And so we have something similar happening with AI, where there was this whole craze about generative AI. Now everyone calls it AI, but then it's like, okay, wait a minute. There's a lot of different types of AI, right? Generative is one variety. And it's also under a microscope at the moment for its the return that it can generate for the investment, but also the massive energy consumption, which basically it equates to this is a very inefficient form of compute for its outcome, depending on the outcome, right? And some of these functions that we're looking at trying to make more intelligent at the very edge tend to be pretty specific. And so it's one of the things that I've been wondering is it better just to code this stuff straight, create a static algorithm and make it predictable, right? Versus over engineering it and throwing more compute at it to make it dynamic with marginal value. I think that
if we go back to blockchain at the beginning of 5G, blockchain was synonymous with 5G, yet it never materialized because it was too complicated. If we look at AI today for MNO, the biggest focus is on firing everyone in the call center, right?
Yeah, basically.
The chatbots take over and you don't ever talk to a real human because the operating cost of that is one of the biggest costs for the MNO. If we look at the reality of where is AI being used in Iran, it's for sleep, deep sleep, ultra deep sleep, whatever the hell you want to call it. But that doesn't mean that you need a GPU at every site to figure out when to turn the stupid radio off, because it's pretty easy to figure out what that algorithm is going to be and to set your markers or whatever, or just say at 2 a.m. is going off. I don't need AI to tell me that my load on the network isn't going to be at peak at 2 a.m.
Well, it's supposed to be a smart radio, not a stupid radio. Okay.
Right. But again, it is deep sleep and energy savings monetization. We had this conversation. No, it's saving money and increasing efficiencies, but I'm not generating any money unless we're talking net profit monetization. It's not top line monetization. And how sexy is AI for putting things to sleep and saving energy compared to whatever this other generative stuff that everyone's trying to pitch in terms of I can in real time understand what's happening with my RAN, and I can move beams everywhere on the antennas, and I could follow users, and all of those fantasies is, I think, the word I'm going to use, because the radio environment is so complex that if you wanted to do that, how much is it going to cost you? And are you going to net back what you paid in compute resources and energy and everything else to figure out what that real life world situation looks like?
Right. I call it the cost of compute that almost I don't hear hardly anyone talking about it. It's odd. But it's a topic that should be front and center. It's kind of like the whole Open RAN argument that it's cheaper somehow, right? Exactly. It's like, okay, it's great that you put all these GPUs out there. You have all this intelligence that you're infusing into the RAN for whatever purpose. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, in terms of benefit and outcome, is the cost of intelligence worth it, right? And
I mean, I think the machine learning part of it swaps out the AI part of it in terms of what is most efficiently learned from all of that data that's being generated in the RAN. Specifically, if we're talking layer one, and how are we going to make that channel better, less noisier, or whatever for the operator to maximize their efficiency and usage of that valuable resource.
Yeah. No, that's great insight. So any last takes or thoughts about the event? And more importantly, I mean, what do you think needs to really substantially change here other than the things that we've already mentioned?
One takeaway, and this was hearsay, but T-Mobile was not very happy. And given that they had the biggest booth, that's never a good sign. Yeah. And so you have a huge tier one sponsor that is not happy with who showed up, how many people showed up. We still don't have a final count, which is already telling as to how bad it probably was. Mm-hmm. And I think one way is it's always been an operator show about the technology and the use cases. So we've seen in Barcelona where they have a full end-to-end display of how can I actually implement whatever your case study is, so that I can fully understand, is it 50 pieces of hardware with software end-to-end from the IoT sensor and whatever to get me to actually have something working? Or is it going to be only 12 pieces? And where do I buy these 12 pieces or 50 pieces? And do I have to go look for every one of them? Are you going to provide it to me as a turnkey solution? All of these things are not good examples of the usage that I saw in Las Vegas compared to what we saw in Barcelona. I think having real operators from north of the U.S. and south of the U.S. would be helpful in understanding. Again, it should be an America's show.
Expanding the market,
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
Americas that's in Las Vegas. And again, if it's as mad as I had heard they were, that's not a good sign for GSMA to figure out how they're going to turn things around for next year. And if they or scale down their booth, then the end is near.
Well, we have to also remember GSMA, their board is the operators, right?
Exactly.
And so this in a way is their own doing as well, right? I mean, 2 years ago,
they should have forced their own to show up.
Right. Rather than talking about 5G monetization and Gen AI and all this other stuff, what is it that we were saying? Focus on modernization. How do you get these operators to make this transition toward a more substantial 5G network, whether it's from a coverage standpoint or just making that transition to SA? And I think missing out on these priorities and then filling the agenda with these aspirational topics, I think, is a complete disservice. And we've seen it play out. That's the thing. I mean, we're saying what we're saying, and I think we're both being frank. And I think the industry should take it as constructive feedback, right? There is a bit of, well, we told you so, but we did tell you. And it's time to kick these these concepts and themes that are too far in the future, that are not even within the realm of practical interest of the operators. Kick that stuff to the curb and let's get real and figure out how to fix
how can we be more tactical?
Right.
Because we're future tripping on all of these technologies and concepts and everything. It's always about what's happening in the future, but it's never about fixing what's wrong today.
Right. And, one of the things I noticed, I was looking through the agenda, for instance, with the AI topics, these are things we've already seen before. They're just rehashing old decks from 3-4 years ago from the previous AI hype and trying to resell them, sell them again in this hype cycle. And I don't know. I really don't think that's going to help out too much, right?
But we're going to see obviously a ton of it in Barcelona next year because that's what's going to happen. And again, the use cases, maybe we'll see some new ones on the phones, in the networks, or whatever. But at least, hopefully, the operators can at least talk about what are real tangible things that they are doing to fix their network and to upgrade it and to be able to make it more efficient. So maybe they can earn more money in some way, shape, or form with whatever new services that they can provide and whatever APIs are going to do.
Yeah. And rather than aspiring to become a techco, aspiring to be the next generation communication service provider, right? Don't lose your identity. And I think operators, it's really clear that operators are solving a problem that the cloud vendors those CSPs, right? The cloud service providers have discovered is kind of tough, right? And so I think there's always going to be a role for telecoms operators and mobile wireless operators, telco operators in general. I think that should be appreciated, embraced. And the real question is, how do they evolve their game? And that probably doesn't mean becoming like AWS or Microsoft or following this whole techco narrative, right? So I don't know. There's a lot I think if there's any point in time where the industry really needs to contemplate how it got to
the existential crisis.
This is about that time, and I don't think generative AI or enterprise XYZ or edge computing is going to be the solution. So
I think there was very little discussion about 6G at the show. I'm sure we're going to hear more in Barcelona, but again, the recent rumblings of terahertz frequency bands and things associated with 6G should just be off the table. It's a fantasy for if you want to spend money on R&D, go and do that. But the practicalities of that have not emerged even in 5G when we talked about using D-band for backhaul. 5G base stations, because the density would be so high that every 100 feet we would need to use 124 gigahertz backhaul link or 40 link to be able to connect everything. And that was a pipe dream, and that never materialized. And now it's being pushed off onto the 6G realm of we'll talk about it there because we didn't get a chance.
That might be fine. That might be fine. That might actually be the right timing for it, right? It right. Will probably solve a problem that's actually a problem, and it will be a solution at that point. And maybe now it's just a solution looking for the problem. So, I mean, there's we have bigger fish to fry. So
exactly. I mean, it's again trying to solve a problem we don't know exists today that might happen in 5 years from now, and at that point, then maybe that's the right tool in the toolbox, or maybe there's going to be a better tool that comes up that gets in.
Yeah, I think it's. I think this is a great opportunity for the industry to rethink itself. It has to. I mean, if what you're saying is, and I'm sure that is pretty accurate, a lot more accurate than other accounts that we'll probably see. I think the matter is urgent, and it's time to get real. So. But anyway, hey, Earl, thank you so much for the update. I was there, so I really appreciate perspective, man. Really good stuff. And so, hey, folks, if you want to reach out to Earl, just, check out EJL Wireless Research at www.ejlwireless.com and connect with him on LinkedIn. He's a really cool guy. Very, very knowledgeable. I think he's one of the top analysts out there. Great head on his shoulders, and it's great to do this collaboration with you, Earl. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks, dude.
And so please subscribe to the Next Curve YouTube channel. The easiest thing to do is subscribe to the Next Curve Research Portal and Media Center at www.next-curve.com for a constant diet of the tech and industry insights that matter. And we will see you next time.